What's going on, everybody? Welcome to my channel and another interview in my interview series. Today, I'm speaking with Sue Bowles, a survivor turned author, speaker, and master certified life coach. Having done the hard work of healing from a childhood rape, an eating disorder, other sexual assaults, and being twice suicidal, Sue now defines the effect the life-altering events have on her. The events no longer define Sue, she defines them. Sue leads My Step Ahead, an organization committed to breaking the stigma around mental health struggles. You only have to be a step ahead to help the person behind you, is a statement, and that is the bedrock of the values Sue brings. She helps stuck people get unstuck by discovering hope, journeying together for the next step ahead. Whether speaking on a podcast, a stage, or one-on-one, Sue's enthusiasm is contagious, shining the light of hope wherever the listener needs, cheering them to see their dreams become present reality. And Sue's award-winning first book, This Much I Know, The Space Between, is available on Amazon and Kindle. Sue, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Derek. I'm looking forward to this.
So we met on Facebook as context, through a podcast, collaboration group.
Mhm.
And I pitched to you and reached out to you. You came and looked at this channel and you're like, okay, this is something I'd like to be on, and I'm grateful for that. So I'm here to share your story to my audience that is very engaging in this space of mental health. I know that we're going to learn a lot from you today, Sue. So, as I mentioned in the intro, you hit a lot of unfortunate places, and you're like,
yeah.
But before we get really into the darkness, what was it like before the darkness? What was your childhood like? Where were you from? And what was your upbringing like?
Sure. I am from Dayton, Ohio, and traditional family, mother, father, siblings, animal, pet, and just your normal, ordinary family. We had our struggles like everybody else, but we were in school and did well in school and involved in activities. I'm remembering more as I get older, and then that sounds kind of weird, but for a while there was a chunk of my childhood I didn't remember. And I've learned that was just that was a byproduct of all the struggling that I was going through as I dealt with my trauma, before I even brought my trauma to the surface. Right. So, but good memories, lots of laughs. I just share some of them in the book, playing soccer on Saturday, going to watch my brother play soccer, and dad would be in the goal and we take shots on him. My dad's black walnut fudge, just all kinds of fun stuff. So family reunions, we hosted a lot of family reunions. So I went down to Cincinnati, where my mom and dad are both from, and family gatherings down there. So just normal, ordinary upbringing.
Black walnut fudge.
Yes.
I want some.
I will see if my dad can make another batch. I sent him some black walnuts a couple of years ago, and I actually sent him another bag, store-bought bag, this past year, just so he can make it again. But he didn't give me any, so I have to talk to him about that.
My mom and grandmom, I think my mom started doing it too. My mother will be watching this, so sorry I forgot that. But they used to make some.
Hi, Derek's mom.
Yes, welcome to say hi to Sue for me. They used to make awesome peanut butter fudge.
Ooh.
It was really good.
That sounds good.
So how, you have this childhood, and you really sparked my interest when you said that there's parts you don't remember, because that's a typical byproduct of trauma, right? Right. And at a young age, you don't realize it then, and some of these memories can only pop up years later, right? Mm-hmm. So what was, looking back in retrospect, what do you think was what caused that kind of drop in memory?
As I've learned more about myself, as I've done the hard work of healing, it's all related to that trauma, because trauma rewires your brain, scientifically proven. So here I was at a very young formative age 7, where I had my first trauma happen, So my brain was just starting to develop. They call it the age of reason. And it was just starting to grow and develop, and it was automatically rewired. So I think because I was in PTSD mode of fight or flight, you learn to shut down things, because all you want to do, and you don't realize you're doing it at the time, but all you want to do is protect yourself and survive. So I was in survival mode. I grew up in survival mode. And I think that fed into not remembering a lot of things until, again, I'm on the other side of it now, so that I can start to remember and cherish those memories more, and enjoy them even more.
So we've talked in pre-interview, and
Mhm.
I know that, hey, you've written a book. Your entire life is out there, and we're going to cover it. So I'm not shy to ask you anything about this stuff, but I will say, this might be sensitive to some people, and we're not trying to trigger anyone, but we are talking about Sue's life, and that's what's important, because we don't want to deal with any stigma either, right? We're trying to,
Right.
well, it's okay to talk about these things. So with that said,
Mhm.
can you explain a little more what that first trauma was for you?
Sure. And to be a little more specific for your listeners, I do want to give a trigger warning, in addition to the one that Dirk just gave. What I'm about to share has to do with sexual assault, has to do with eating disorders, has to do with being suicidal and depression. If anything of that in that circle is a potential trigger for you, please exercise self-care. If that means you need to shut off this show,
Yep.
have a self-care plan and come back to it later, it will be waiting for you. I never want my story to do harm to anybody else. I share it to help, not hurt.
I love that
So,
message.
so having said that, the event that Derek is asking me about happened in first grade. I was coming home from school. Everybody walked to school those days. It was safe. There was never a thought about it. Everybody in the neighborhood walked home from school. And a classmate enticed me into the woods on the school property, on the edge of the school property, and proceeded to hold me against my will for 45 minutes. And he raped me more than once. As if that wasn't bad enough, because I didn't know what happened and I didn't have the words, and because it wasn't on the radar, no one knew to ask. So no one did anything wrong that day except Bobby, the boy who raped me. But because of that, my emotions got frozen in time, because I didn't know how to tell anybody. I didn't know what happened, first of all. So it became a 15-year secret. Think of your age 7 and you're almost 22 when you finally tell somebody. That's a 15-year secret. You've
That's a
got all your,
that's a long
that's
time to hold that weight.
that's
Man,
a decade and a half. And then you go through your tumultuous preteen and teenage years on top of all that, and 3.5 years of college. So there was a whole bunch of dirt on top of everything else. And by the time it finally was able to dig its way to the surface, there was a lot it had to dig through. So that was the trauma. That led to other things, because, and I say that because, again, that foundation I had at age 7 suddenly became shifting sand. It wasn't solid because of what happened, and my brain just rewired itself and had to find a new way to process things, unhealthy ways, inaccurate ways, but survival ways. So that entire shaky foundation, I then built my life on. And by the time you get to high school, college, young adult, if you have a shaky foundation, it's only going to tremble all the more. So that's where, it led to the eating disorder. It led to depression. It led to anxiety and anger issues, and being suicidal twice. I've had suicidal thoughts where my brain had convinced me that nobody cared. And if nobody cared, why did I want to live? And at one point there was only two thoughts keeping me alive. My parents were divorcing. My eating, I wasn't handling it well, because I will use the word unstable. I was not secure in my emotions. So my eating disorder was kicking in. Therefore, my brain wasn't getting the fuel it needed to be able to process things correctly. So I was catching myself in my own cesspool circle. And through that, because didn't know how to deal with emotions to start with, then you throw in your parents getting divorced after 34 years of marriage and everything that happens with that. I didn't know how to deal with those emotions, and it just kept building. And at that point in time, I was rational enough to know there were two thoughts keeping me alive. I was rational enough to know that my family did not need to go to my funeral in the middle of the divorce. And the second thing, and this was even the more powerful one, was there was a nagging optimism that told me it was going to be okay. And I could not shake that no matter how much I wanted to. I'm a Christian, and that nagging optimism was my faith in Christ telling me it was going to be okay. Now, here I am. That was 1991. This is 2022. So over 20 years later. And, here I am, and it is okay.
Well, that's good. So sorry to hear that, first off. I mean,
Thanks.
that's awful. But as you're going through your formative years and your teens and you're in high school and experiencing the eating disorder and the suicidal thoughts and everything, are you remembering what happened at this point? Are you still is that still kind of locked away, and you weren't really understanding why you were having these issues? Or when did you finally realize what happened? Like, how old were you when it just made sense? Oh my God, that happened, and it's called rape.
My senior year of college, when it came out, I was in a conversation with my dean of students, who had become my confidant, my counselor, and he was trying to help me get ready for the work world. He kind of knew I was not emotionally ready for the work world, and he was giving me different homework assignments, and we would get together the next week and go over them. And I still do not remember what the topic was, what his question was. What I remember is that I went off on this semi monologue for half a minute while I'm inspecting the weave of the carpet in his office. And I said, well, when society tells you not to say anything. And my voice trailed off. And Ed was very astute, and he kind of paused, and he looked at me and said, Sue, did someone hurt you? And I said, yeah. He said, your parents? I said, no. He said, somebody. I said, somebody else. And he asked what happened. That was the first time it came out. I did not know it wanted to come out. I didn't know it needed to come out. It wasn't like I had this thought in my mind for 3 weeks. I'm going to go tell Ed I need to tell somebody. Because the next week I went to my counselor in town. I asked Ed to come with me. And even then I was shadow boxing, where the counselor looked at Ed and said, what do you think? And Ed said, I think she needs to quit shadow boxing and tell you what she told me. So it was not intentional at all. But there's a book out called The Body Keeps the Score. And in some way or another, the things that we have not resolved will come out. And for me, it was coming out through a number of different ways. And it finally came out in that conversation with Ed.
So I'm still interested in what it was like through school and high school, because I don't have that story that you have, but I was very just always anxious and terrified in school, and felt very awkward and shy, and I didn't show it, but my insides were shaking. I was just miserable in school because of the social aspect.
Right.
And you have all this other weight on you. Did you truly understand where it was coming from the sexual assault and rape, or were you just still kind of figuring out, why do I feel this way? Did you just feel like maybe I'm just awkward and different, or
I,
did you really know? Did you really know what happened?
I didn't know. I did not know. I knew that I felt very insecure. I knew that I I knew that I wanted to talk about to somebody, but that was more but I didn't know what was driving that. I was very insecure. I was very anxious. I was a bit of a misfit. I was trying hard to fit in. I was in chorus. I was in theater. I was in marching band. I played basketball my senior year. So I did all the things. So I was very involved in that regard, because it at least gave me an identity. It gave me something to belong to, someplace where I felt like I mattered. I think that as I look back, that's the overriding theme I see, is that I was trying to find a place where I fit in, where I felt valued. That ended up carrying over to college, and it increased dramatically in a very unhealthy way, in that I was over involved in college. I was taking an overload of classes. I was working 2 campus jobs for 20 hours a week. And then I was in all kinds of activities. My senior year of college, I did 3 major campus events, all within a matter of a few months. I was the homecoming chair, then I did the winter formal, and then I did a spring 18-hour dance-a-thon for muscular dystrophy, all in my senior year of college.
Wow.
On top of being on the student activities board, being section editor of the school newspaper, being a radio DJ, and being in a sorority and little sister of a fraternity.
So one could argue that, you know, that was unhealthy to take on all
Mhm.
that, right? And that
Yep.
was kind of a coping skill, and you're probably,
Right.
You're turning your attention away from those feelings
Mhm.
and avoiding them by doing all that work. I will say this though, I think that's a better option than what I did, which was drugs and alcohol, right? So,
I'm not saying alcohol wasn't involved. That was
but
involved too.
in high school, in order to try to fit in, I ended up finding myself wanting to be with the cool people, the cool kids,
Mhm.
right? Which got me into
Right.
marijuana and just all kinds of
Right.
stuff, different things.
Right.
But you know, I can think back in high school and think of a few people that were actually good friends, people I can
Mhm.
trust. I don't think I felt it at the time, but when I look back, okay, yeah, these other people weren't, nothing against them, but looking back, they didn't really have my back like I thought. What was that
Mhm.
like for you? Were you able to establish at least a handful of like solid relationships with people, or were you always, or did you just kind of keep boundaries, and how did that look for you?
My security was more in being seen. So I did all the activities because I was seen. I had a boyfriend. We were on and off again for a number of years. Um, and that was probably the most security I felt. I didn't have a lot of friends. I really didn't have many friends. I had acquaintances. I had bandmates, that kind of thing. But I really didn't have anyone that I really interacted with. Um, yeah, I was more of a, I don't want to say a loner, but I was a good student. I did my grades, did my activities. I went home and I had a job. And, went home and did whatever I needed to do there. But it was more, my security was more in the activities because it gave me something to do. That translated, when I talked about how it increased even more in college, as I have learned more about myself. Writing the book is very educational. You learn a lot about yourself when you write a book about yourself. So,
I'd be
and
terrified. I'd be
and
terrified to write a book.
well, I came to understand myself more, and it's been really good. And one thing I learned is that because of all that insecurity, I was wearing a mask. I wore it in high school. I wore it in college. I wore it until 8 years ago. And it was the mask that I was okay, that Sue was the strong one. There was nothing wrong with Sue. Sue had it all together, and everything was good to go. And I was wanting to make others believe I was someone I wasn't. And what ended up happening is I also lied to myself to try to convince myself I was someone I wasn't. That's where that cognitive dissonance came in, because I'm trying to portray one thing and I know inside I'm fake. And that only made it worse. So the activity, as the eating disorder started in the college, the activity became my number, because again, that theme of having value from being seen carried over. If I was seen, I had value. If I valued, I mattered. So I stayed busy so I was seen, so that I felt like I mattered. But what ended up happening in all actuality was activity became the number, because if I stayed busy, I didn't have to think.
Yeah.
And if I didn't have to think, I didn't have to feel. And if I didn't have to feel, I didn't have to deal with my stuff. And my stuff petrified
I mean, we all know alcoholic. We know that term.
me.
And then we joke about workaholic. It almost can be like a badge of honor.
Mhm.
I'm a
Right.
workaholic, and I can relate to that.
Mhm.
But it's a drug. It's a disease.
Right.
Being a workaholic can be detrimental
Mhm.
because of what you use that as.
Right.
Um, Again, not to, I don't want to keep disclaimering everything, but let's talk about your eating disorder and hopes, we don't want to offend anyone, but what was that like? And was it all through high school and college? Was it just a little blip in your time, or what did that look like for you as far as disorder is
I
concerned?
think the eating disorder started in high school, but it really ramped up in college. And what happened was that, again, my foundation was shaky from age 7. So then as my discomfort around people grew, because even in college, I had acquaintances, I had associations, but I didn't really eat with people a whole lot. So by now, the paranoia kind of started setting in. And what I would, what ended up happening was that I may have enjoyed another serving of food, but my brain interpreted it that if I went up to the cafeteria line to get more food, everybody would be watching. And that would mean that Sue was found out because Sue had a need. And Sue had painted this mask that Sue had no needs because Sue had it all together. So that's what all that whole mask thing came in. Now, the need I had was how your body works. Food is fuel. But
Mhm.
I worked it out to be something of an issue. So instead, I learned to curb my hunger. I would dump my tray, I would get out of Dodge, and I would start snacking in my room to curb my hunger because suddenly hunger equated to being uncomfortable. And
Wow.
uncomfortable meant I had to get out of there.
So you just, part of it was just not feeling comfortable eating in front of people.
Not only eating, but just uncomfortable as a person.
Wow.
Because again, because I was afraid to be found out. I was afraid, it ended up being, I was afraid to be like everybody else. But I was afraid to be found out because, again, my brain was not processing things correctly to start with. And then I'm depriving it of the nutrients it needs to function at its optimum. So it's not interpreting things even worse. And that's how the whole eating disorder thing started. My eating disorder is called OSFED. It's other specified feeding and eating disorder. What that means is a catch-all diagnosis. What it means is that I don't meet all the diagnostic criteria for any of the other eating disorders that show up in the DSM. Some call it atypical anorexia. What it means is that I have disordered eating. I do not have a healthy relationship with food, but I don't, like in the case of anorexia, I don't have the weight loss. Or in bulimia, I'm not purging. Or in binge eating, I'm not binging or anything like that. So I don't have all those criterion to check off the boxes, but I still have an issue.
Because that was going to be my next question or next statement was like, from what you're telling me, first thought is, oh, anorexia. Because
Right.
if you're not eating, then you're not feeding yourself nutrition. You end up losing
Nope.
weight and becoming anorexic. That's not the case for you.
Nope.
It's just this mental relationship, and I would guess some of that's kind of fear of shame. Is that part of that paranoia, where people are going to shame you for eating, even though in your head you say you don't want to be discovered, which I find very
Mhm.
interesting because that to
Right.
me is paranoia.
Right.
Like you think everyone's watching you when
Mhm.
in reality they're not.
Right. Right.
So am I close to that? Is it also a shame aspect to it?
I think there's always some aspect of shame because again, I didn't want to deal with my stuff. I didn't want to be found out. I didn't want to be found that I was struggling. And I think people kind of knew that there was stuff going on, but again, the portrayal that I had convinced myself that I personified was that Sue can handle anything, and that's what I liked. Sue's the strong one. Now, with that as well, that carried over to my family, where I put pressure on myself because I felt like I had can painted the picture again that Sue was strong and didn't have any issues, so everything was good. So it just perpetuated itself in one cesspool is all the only way I can phrase it. There is no look to an eating disorder. If I did not tell you I had an eating disorder, you probably will not think it because I don't look like I do.
True.
But
Yeah.
here's the thing. There are people struggling with an eating disorder that you don't know about. Men and women, boys and girls. There are a number of different eating disorders that
Yeah.
people aren't aware of. That anything anything that is revolved around restriction, is, it can be pre-eating disorder behavior. A diet, eating disorders, first of all, are not diets gone bad. They have nothing to do with you know, image or anything like that. It has to do with it. Ultimately, they have to do with some kind of underlying issue that has to do with some kind of something unresolved. For me, it was my trauma. For other people, it's other things. But there is something underlying which has not been dealt with. And that is coming out in the form of an addiction and an eating disorder. The challenge is that in every other addiction, recovery is based on abstaining.
Oh, great point.
In an
Yes.
eating
You need to
disorder,
eat. You need to eat.
yes, in an eating disorder, recovery is based on learning to eat correctly and in balance and in a steady fashion.
Yeah.
That's why when I speak, I say, I tell people, I'm going to get on a soapbox here. Don't get me too started on diet culture.
Yeah.
You know, some of the diets that are, hey, cut out carbs or cut out fat or cut out whatever are not helpful. Now, I'm not saying that other people don't benefit. They see results.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that carbs are the only thing that give your brain energy. Fats are the only thing that help your body have the sensation of being full and protect your vital organs. And proteins are the only thing that rebuild your strength and your muscle mass. So why on God's green earth, if your body is designed to need each of those in balance, would you then try to throw off that balance? A balanced meal plan, moderation is key, yes. Balanced meal plan followed consistently is the key to health. If you had told me that every person has what they call a set weight, where your body, because of its DNA and its genetics, knows what your body weight needs to be to fully and correctly and in a balanced way support your body, your joints, your organs, everything else, so that your body will do what you want it to do. I did not anticipate my set weight to be what it was. I had to come to grips with that. I don't think about it now. The one thing I will not discuss whenever I talk are weight ranges. I won't talk calories. I won't talk weights. Anything with numbers is triggering for other people, and that is just off limits. But what I can say within that is that all of us, our body and our genetics knows what our body needs so that our body will serve us the way we want it to serve us. And if we are not treating our body correctly and giving it the proper balanced nutrition that it needs, it will not serve us in its entirety.
You make a great point. And a parallel, I'm an alcoholic. My audience knows this. I've spoken in depth on it. And almost 8 years sober.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But if you would have told me in May 19, 2014, when I went to rehab, and rehab was like, all right, well, you don't need to quit drinking, but you need to maybe eliminate these 5 things and just try to moderate. You don't, like, you still need the beer, still need the alcohol. Well, maybe like, let's just get rid of liquor. Just drink beer,
Yeah.
like, and some people do that with success, because they can have enjoy beer, but man, when they drink some whiskey, they turn into a monster. So
right,
there's still risk there.
Mm-hmm.
You can't quit eating.
Right.
So man, and I can see why that's so different, and I don't know if I have a disorder, but I can tell you I eat emotionally and mentally, and I've put on a lot of weight in the last few years, and I have an addiction to, food. I'll eat for pleasure a little too much sometimes. So I got to put that into check. But I've made sure I don't own a scale. My daughter is like, I want a scale. I'm like, no, there's not going to be a scale.
Good. Good.
When I go to the doctors, I look up at the ceiling when they weigh me. I don't want to see that number.
Right.
I don't.
But here's the thing. I recently became aware of this on the Today show here in the States. There was a woman, I believe her name was Ginny Jones, I believe it was. Find it again. Ginny Jones created a set of cards that you can take to the doctor and have at the doctor's office. And it says, please do not weigh me unless it's absolutely medically necessary. And they can put it in your chart. And because weight and numbers are such a trigger.
Yeah.
I used to have 2 scales in the house. And my diet, and because when my disorder was really active, I was hyper attentive to things. And one of early on, my dietitian's homework was bring in your scales next week. And it was really hard to do.
Yeah.
And I walked in and I gave them to her. I said, I almost didn't. She's like, and I would have sent you right back home because we weren't going to have any other discussion until I had these. And I got to the point where I was like, you can throw those out. I don't want
Yeah.
them. And because they are a trap. They are a trap.
I before my weight gain, I went the other direction and was heavy into kickboxing,
Mhm.
not for competition. I always feel
Right.
like I have to clarify that. I wasn't
Not
trying,
MMA.
right, but it's just a class where you just, they yell at you for 45 minutes and you're hitting the bag and doing burpees, fitness
Yeah.
stuff. And my obsessiveness went too far with that. And then I wasn't fueling my body right. I felt like, well, I'm not supposed to eat carbs, but I'm going to go burn 1,000 calories. Probably should have had some carbs before that. So, but what ended up happening was I lost too much weight. I'm 6'2". I got down to 185. And when
Oh.
I look back at old pictures, it was ridiculous. It
Mhm.
was I was just boned, like my face was sunken
Mhm.
in. And I weighed myself incessantly every day. Like I
Right.
just obsessed over that damn
Right.
scale.
Mhm.
And if one day I was 185 and the next day I was 187, I got to get back in the gym. I got to lose those 2
Mhm.
pounds.
There you go.
And then my body can't handle anymore. It's my joints are tore up. I quit
Mhm.
doing it. And then 60 pounds later, here I am. So
Right.
it's, it's a cycle.
And here's the thing, your reaction to, first of all, everyone's weight fluctuates. It
Mhm.
fluctuates throughout the day, but your reaction to that is a potential eating disorder behavior. It's a reaction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
It can go in. I mean, I mean, there are so many. I continue to learn. I learned today there are 5 eating disorders that are in the DSM that medical field and use that as a diagnosis. But there are, I think, 6 or 7 other ones that mental health practitioners recognize. And one of them is, I think it's called orthorexia. It's clean eating to the extreme. And one, what was the other one called? I don't know if I have it here. Muscle dysmorphia, which they said was tends to be affect more men than women. It's a disorder characterized by a disruptive obsession with musculature and physique. The individual will fixate on obtaining the perfect form of muscularization. And I never realized that. And that one tends to affect more men than women.
oh, I can absolutely relate to that
Yeah.
because I've always been a husky.
Mhm.
When I was in school, I was a husky kid, not a fat kid. I was fat, but I was
Right.
husky. I was trying to be politically correct here. But for the first time after working out like I was for a year and a half or so, I saw a different person in the mirror. I started
Mhm.
tone. I had bicep veins for the first
Right.
time, right? And I got addicted to that. I
Right.
absolutely did,
Right.
100%.
Right.
So I can relate to that. So now that was
Right.
the driving thing.
Mhm.
Um, and if I took a week off and all of a sudden that vein didn't pop out like I wanted it to,
Mhm. Got to get back to the gym.
yeah. So
Yep.
yeah, that's me in
Yep.
a nutshell right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like I'm being coached right now. But well, look, Sue. So thank you for sharing all that too, because I know a lot of people struggle with that as well. So in reading your information in your bio and your website, and your platform is called My Step Ahead,
Yes.
and you say, your step ahead began in 2015, and then just recently you mentioned in this video that your mask came off 8 years ago. So I would gather that's around the same thing, around the same time, and it has a lot to do with your pastor teaching
Yeah.
you. So before we go into the mask coming off, now we know that in college you're talking about it, but you're still dealing with the eating disorder And the suicidal thoughts, was that in college too or in high school?
One was in high school, and then one was after graduate school.
Okay. When you're done with college and doing too many things, um, what's the span of time between then and your awakening in 2015? Like how much time is there?
Wow. I mean, I graduated undergrad in 86 and then did my master's and got that in 88. So we're talking almost 2 decades, good 15 years at least.
What was Sue's life during those? Was it just more cycling in and out of the disorders and then the trauma? And what were you doing in that time? Were you seeking help? Were you in therapy? What were you doing?
And I was off and on. I was, but I wasn't with an eating disorder specialist. So she didn't know how to really get at things. I was, I was dealing with stuff I had going on in life, but it still wasn't getting to the root.
Right.
And you got to dig down to the root. Yes, I was in and out of counseling. I was doing okay. I've had a professional job. I worked on college campuses for 8 years in student services. Was involved in a lot of things as usual, and it was okay. I went through a time period where I wasn't in counseling and my eating was fine, and I thought everything was good. And then 2005, I lost a dear friend to breast cancer, and where things started for me, this whole journey kind of took a turn. Was 3 years later in 2008. I was grieving her like yesterday. And I have some red flags where I know that my eating disorder is trying to kick in. And some of those red flags started coming up. So I reached out to my pastor at the time, and he connected me with the counselor I'm still with now. And her name's Amanda. She's with Grace Recovery Counseling in South Carolina. She started here in Ohio. She moved to South Carolina. We continue to meet via virtual, and it's been fantastic. April this year, April 2022, will be 14 years now that I've been with her. And
Good for you.
yeah, and I wouldn't be where I am today without
Oh,
that.
I preach about therapy all the time. I'm 10 years.
Oh,
10 years with the same person.
yeah,
And,
it makes a world of difference.
and with the world of virtual,
Oh yeah.
doesn't matter.
Oh no, it's great.
When COVID was going crazy, I could still meet my guy, but so
Right.
I didn't mean to
Exactly.
interrupt, but
Oh, you're
yeah,
fine. You're fine.
you
So
don't have to convince me how therapy is. That's awesome.
so during that time, that's where things started turning for me. And even then, I met her in 2008. It wasn't until 2014 that we started dealing with what happened when I was 7. It was 4+ decades since the event before I dealt with it. Now she found, it came out. I told her about it probably in our second or about our third session. And she looked at me and said, Sue, this is huge. Have you ever worked it through with anybody? And I looked at her and said, I wouldn't know what it looks like to say I worked it through. So I guess there's your answer. But she and we have a fantastic relationship, and we've talked about these kind of things. And she has since said that we had to get me stronger in the present before we could go back to the past. So the first 6 years, I had a lot of boundary issues. I didn't know how to communicate. I was used to being in manipulative situations. I didn't know how to speak up for myself. I had to realize that I had a voice, and that voice was worthy of being heard, and that it had something to say, and that I could stand up for myself. So we had to work through all of that before we could even deal with the ultimate root issue.
I love that. I never thought of it that way, and it makes so much sense. Stronger in the present before dealing with the past, because
Right.
as you learned, and as I learned, when you start really drudging up the past, woo, it's
Mm-hmm.
painful.
Oh yeah.
If you're not in the right state of mind,
Mm-hmm.
then that's not going to be good.
Right.
So I
Because
find
because
that,
if my foundation was shaky from age 7, by the time I'm getting to 2014, I'm shaking like sand.
yeah,
So you're not going to want to, try to rattle that cage. That's a bad analogy, but you're not going to want to start digging on that when you know that it's shaking and could crumble. You've got to somehow start righting that ship so that it can withstand, the foundation fixing.
that's profound. So what is that like? What point do you feel like your present is strong enough to then really just now let's start exercising the past.
Yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. 2014. And
Okay,
what
so
happened, yeah, so what happened was in 2012, my brother was in a drunk driving accident. So 2013, he was sentenced to serve 18 months in prison. He got out in August 2014. And earlier in the year, a movie had come out called Ragamuffin, and it's based on the life of the late Christian musician Rich Mullins. And Rich was really big in the 90s. His big song was Awesome God. And that was a hard watch for me. I did a lot of secret wiping of the tears. It's got something in my eye, Mom. That whole deal, because again, I couldn't be found out.
I was just gonna say
And
you didn't want to expose yourself, right? You didn't want
exactly, that's exactly it.
the
I didn't want to
mask
be
was
found out.
still there.
Oh yeah, oh big time. It was worse because
Yeah.
this is the time Amanda, my counselor, and I are starting to deal with the rape. So my emotions are all over the place. So what ended up happening, and she and I started dealing with it just because it's kind of kept coming up, and it was time. We both you kind of feel when it's time, and it was just time to start dealing with it. So watch this movie, and later that summer, the movie producer and the family and friends of Rich who did the movie said they wanted to have a retreat to continue the conversation about it. And one of the themes of the movie was about the masks that we wear. So it took me a while. I finally relented and I went to this retreat. I finally signed up for it. My brother came home in August 2014, and going to this retreat was kind of my reward, his way to reward me for taking care of Mom for 18 months while he was away. But what struck me, and this was the kingpin, is that when my brother got out, he lives with me still now. Um, when he saw people in town, man, I haven't seen you for a while. Where you been? In prison. And that convicted me. If anyone had a reason to keep their story secret, if anyone had a reason to not be honest and not be vulnerable, my brother did.
He
And
was
he
fine
and
with
he and he owned it. He totally owned it. Now he was sober a year before he went to prison, but he will tell you that God had to send him to prison to save him from himself. And so that really convicted me. And I went to Amanda, I was telling her this, and I just looked at her with a real forlorn look in my face. I said, I just want to be authentic. Get me ready. And we had 6 weeks. We spent 6 therapy sessions just dealing with my fear and my anxiety around authenticity and getting ready to go to that retreat. I went to that retreat. It was October 2014. And one of the staff members and I have talked about this, and she said she has since told me that it was like a Hail Mary for me. Could God's kids really love me? And could God really love me? Because I went in there convinced in my mind, faultily, but convinced at that point in time that I was the holy exception, that everything in the Bible was good enough for everybody else but me. Because I was too screwed up, too far gone, and I was a waste of space, and there's no way God could redeem my life. That's what I was believing. I was imploding. It was in the middle of dealing with the rape. So first of all, you have all that going on. That drums up emotions. Eating, it was an eating disorder. Emotions are not your friends. So I'm fighting within a fight. And then I decided to do this. So that I went into that retreat thinking, I was imploding. I was not doing well at all. And I left there starting to believe for the first time that Jesus Christ loves me. And he not only loves me, he likes me. And he's absolutely head over heels crazy about me.
There is a
And I
difference.
never thought of it that way before.
I mean, there's a difference between loved and liked. I think that's funny.
Exactly.
It's like a friend loves you, but if they like you too,
Yeah,
that means they're close.
exactly. So, and that started it. That first year, I had to own my story. And I was in denial about my story up to then. I hated my story. I went through a long period of time being hacked off at God. Why this? Why that? And now I understand how he's even turning that together for good. But that first year, I had to own my story because you can't go anywhere until you face yourself in the mirror. Then the second year, I went back to the retreat. And again, throughout the year, my counselor and I was continuing to build on all this. The second year, I had to grieve my story. And that was very unexpected, but it was just the byproduct of what was happening in the retreat. And one of my biggest fears was I would cry and never stop. And I cried. The first year I cried about a good 5-10 minutes. Second year I cried for about 10 or 15 minutes, and it was that hard is how I was crying. Excuse me, goodness
That
gracious,
hyperventilating.
big time. And yet no one said. In fact, I've since found out, or I found out that night, someone from the retreat came over and put his arm around me, and he later told me, whatever it is, God put it on me. And I was like, that's the level of love and acceptance that's at these places. So once I owned the story and then grieved it, because there is a lot of loss in my story. And I think that's one thing we don't think about, is that we all have loss in our story. And until we really deal with that loss, no matter what degree it is, there is going to have an aspect of influence in our lives. And then the third year is where things started to turn. I left with a nugget that I am valuable to God, and that and I have something I can say, and that it can make a difference. That is when my mindset started to change. That's when I started writing the book in more earnest. I started recovery from my eating disorder earlier that year. So I had to take a year off because of all the emotions that were coming up. But that foundation, come 2017, I was able to start writing the book more. Excuse me. So, it all continued to build on each other. But when it came down to when I got to the point that I dared to believe that I mattered, that's when things started to change, because then I started walking in that, and I continued to dare. I dared myself to leave all the lies from the past behind.
You build confidence, right? With every time you let a little more of yourself out there and you feel some of that mask away,
Mhm.
right? Did you find that, where you would hit different stages and you just build in confidence the whole way?
Yeah, and for me, it because this retreat is called Walking Stick Retreats. We do them twice a year. They're open to everybody. Our next one is end of April in Southeast Indiana. You can go to the website walkingstickretreats.org and register right now. But these retreats are a safe place where it's okay to be broken. It's okay to be a mess. It's okay to be confused. And it's totally okay to be fine too. But that first year in particular, we were all strangers. And they open up, one of the things that sets us apart is a few weeks before the retreat, they open up a Facebook room for just the participants, so we can start getting to know each other. That first year, they asked us all to be very courageous and share our stories. I had never shared my story in its entirety to anyone other than my counselor. And this is 2014. So I lurked in the room about 3 days. I was kind of stalking. I was commenting on other people, and I was encouraging them, but I wasn't showing my hand. And one morning, I kind of got that heart pound going, and it's like, it's my turn. And took about a half hour to type it out. Bless you. And took about half hour to pound it out, and I gulped when I hit post. And all day long, I was watching the room, just waiting, because up till then, I've been told things were my fault and how much of a screw up I was, and all these things. At least that's what I was interpreting. And I was waiting, just waiting for that to be validated. See, that's why I can't go to this retreat. They're just, they're not going to love me. I can't be loved. And to this day, so we're talking almost 7.5 years, there has not been one negative comment, not one. And everything else has happened since then. Instead, at the very start, I was met with, "You are so brave. I just want to give you a hug. Thank you so much for trusting us. I can't wait to meet you. I want to talk to you more." Right away, there was love and acceptance. So by the time I got there, I at least felt safe. And when you're in a safe place emotionally, then you have courage. But you have to feel safe before you can develop any confidence.
You said another profound thing I want to highlight. There's a lot of loss in your story. Anyone that has a story of trauma in any sense. When you say that, the first thing I think about is, well, yeah, you lost innocence as a child. So much of your, like, okay, I'll speak for myself. I lost the ability to have a great relationship. I lost, I feel like I lost in my childhood where I couldn't have had as much, I didn't have as much fun as I should have because I was dealing with certain things. Is that where you're
Mhm.
coming with when you say there's loss in someone's story? Is that part of it where you lost part of your life while living? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I lost a lot. I mean, yeah, I lost innocence. I lost the ability to know how to have fun. I lost the life skill of self-acceptance. I lost the um, I lost learning how to communicate. I lost learning how to get to know myself and trust myself and my emotions
Yeah.
because I denied my emotions for what, decades. I lost a lot. In addition to losing, a family environment the way I know it was, when mom and dad divorced. So I mean, just all kinds. There's loss comes in so many different ways. I lost the I didn't know how to feel confident and speak up for myself. So all the things that I've had to relearn in therapy are rebuilding losses.
You hit it all right there, and to go back to the other thing you said, how you got to be stronger in the present to deal with
Mhm.
the past. Well,
Right.
Sue, let's look at the present and what you are doing now and what you've been building since you had your spiritual awakening, right? And
Mhm.
that's in your website. You have the term "my step ahead." I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know if in that moment you had that phrase in your mind, but clearly in retrospect that became your battle cry, your step ahead.
Mhm.
So
Right. Right.
let's talk more about your platforms and your step ahead, your coaching,
Sure.
and but also I mean we want to promote you 100%, but like what this journey has been for you now that you have just turned it around and now you're helping other people.
Mhm.
What has this done for your
Wow. It has, the
life?
last 7 years have been just crazy. And actually, the speaking and the podcasting has really taken off just in the last 2 to 3 years. And there's two things. Let me explain my step ahead real quick to your listeners.
Yes.
It comes from two things. When I talked about my parents were divorcing, and that was the second time I was suicidal. I worked at a sports camp in Missouri for 5 years called Kanakuk. And I went to a ski trip went on a ski trip with them in between 1990 and 1991. A dear friend of mine who was a Christian musician named Billy Sprague was there. We had lost contact for a few years. His fiance had been killed in a car wreck on her way to surprise him at a concert. And he found out right before he went on the stage. So he was neck deep in grief. When we reconnected, he was healing. I was just being broken. And I looked at him and said, Billy, I need to learn something you've gone through. I said, how do you go on living when all you want to do is die? And we talked for probably close to an hour and a half. And on the way down to the slopes, what he told me he talked about how in the airports, he had a friend who would challenge him to watch his steps. And he would watch his steps in the airport and each time tell himself, one step closer. I can do this. I just took another step. I'm one step closer. And he literally did that. And he had me do that when we walked down to the slopes that day. And my first thought was, it's a long journey and I'm not going to make it. That was 1991. Now it's 2022.
Yeah.
I'm making it. The second half of my step ahead came, you mentioned it earlier about my pastor. He was doing a teaching on a Sunday morning about growth. And his question was, what does it take to help somebody else? What do you have to do? Where do you have to be in order to help somebody else? And the answer is you only have to be a step ahead. And that's where it really clicked for me. So the whole concept is that while I am reaching out for help on my journey, I can still reach behind me and help the person who's a step or two behind me. Maybe they're just starting their journey. Maybe they're dealing with something I've already gone through. So as I reach back to help and reach out to get help, we form a human chain of support.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of times, anyone who has issues in their life and struggles and stories, I think we tend to think I have to have it all together before I can be of use anywhere. I have to have it all figured out. I have to get my act together before God will love me. All those things. And again, the holy exception. And the whole drive behind this is that you only have to be a step ahead to help the person behind you. Everybody can help somebody now with whatever experience you have. Coming up on a year ago, a coworker tragically lost her dad. And myself and another coworker went out to the home that next day. It was on Easter, so we went out the day after Easter. And there, we had just lost my mom 6 months prior, and I was my mom's caregiver for 8 years. She lived with me. And there was concern expressed, is this too much for you? You know, you're still pretty raw, and understandably so. Are you okay? And I said, I guess we're going to find out, aren't we? And we went out, and while there were tears, yes, by the end of the visit, the person who had just lost her dad was smiling, thanking me, and asking me questions because they were going to the funeral home that afternoon, the next day. What will the funeral home do? What about this? What about that? The arrangements. I had only walked that journey 6 months prior, but I was a step ahead of her.
Yeah.
And I was able to help her simply alleviate some of the questions and the anxiety, and give her a couple things to think about and to write down and be prepared for when she went there. I since found out she told others that that made a huge difference for her.
Yeah.
You only have to be a step ahead to help the person behind you.
Love it. You know, if you think of sponsors in AA,
Mm-hmm.
you know, your sponsor has a sponsor, and that sponsor has a
Yep.
sponsor. It's that
Yep.
chain, you know. And I
Mm-hmm.
would gather in that moment, obviously it's stuck in your mind of being sort of a pivotal, like, oh wow, realization of you only needing one step ahead. I'm sure in that moment
Right.
that was kind of therapeutic for you too. I know you're not doing
It
it for
was.
selfish reasons. You're truly trying to help your friend,
Mm-hmm.
but you're showing strength, you know, and that must help you, right?
Yeah, when I got in the car, I looked at my coworker, and I just kind of started smiling. She's the way I said, I just lived my step ahead. I just lived what I preach. And there's
Yeah,
nothing more powerful and rewarding than having that opportunity.
it's awesome. So I want to read a quote of yours, and then we can move to, as we call to action.
All right.
All right. I found this on your Instagram page. So it says, I started healing and realizing that I'm valuable and that I have something to say that's worthy of being said.
Mm-hmm.
I started realizing that I had value just because of who I am, not for what I did. Then I realized that I can start sharing my story because I have a story that may help somebody else.
Yep.
And that's what I hope we did today. You know,
I
I
hope
hope we
so.
helped other people. You know, when I saw that on your Instagram, I'm like, I'm gonna bring that into here. You know, but so where can people find you? How to engage with you? The whole thing. What's your net?
Sure. Sure. So I am now a master certified life coach. And what that means is I get to walk with other people on their journey as they work to have something better for themselves. You know, my clients are ones who want something better, and they're not going to quit until they get it. And that might be, maybe there's a relationship. Maybe it's financial goals. I'm working with someone right now that's looking into doing a new career. Maybe it's, just how do I communicate? How do I do time management? Any kind of life skill stuff like that are things that I get to walk with my clients through. I worked with a mother-daughter team a year ago who had a big fallout with COVID, and just learned, about communication. Someone else wanted to, I'm working with a few people now who are changing jobs, and helping them through that. So it's very enjoyable and rewarding to help people take their next step. That's what I get to do. That's why it's called My Step Ahead. The business name is My Step Ahead. So you can go to SueBowles.com. I have certain times throughout the year where I open up slots because I have an opportunity to take on a few more clients. I am in that window right now. So I'd be happy to have a 15-minute consultation. They can sign up on that through my website. Again, SueBowles.com. I'm sure Derek will have it in the show notes. Send me the message to that form. I'll be in touch. We can talk, find out what it is you're trying to get better at and how I can best help you. The link to the book is on there. I'm on Facebook and Instagram as My Step Ahead. And then there's also Sue Bowles Coaching on Facebook, and then Twitter and a little bit everywhere. The other website, this one's still being developed, is called mystepahead.com. That is geared to be more of a resource and an encouragement website. Again, it is getting revamped. There's not a lot of it on there yet. There are some blog posts and some things on there. But again, if someone is interested in having me on as a speaker, be it through a podcast, maybe you're doing a seminar somewhere, maybe you're having an event and you have a conference, you need a keynote speaker or a workshop leader, you can reach me through mystepahead.com or the other website, and I'd be happy to get in touch with you so we can get that process started.
You are correct. I will have all this information in the show notes. And I hope there's some engagement for you. I know we don't do these things as a pitch but as to grow business, but it is part of promotion. I mean, it is what it is.
Sure.
But really, I think we hit a home run sharing your story.
Thanks.
And I hope that I'm positive people learn something from this, and then hopefully feels a little better or realizes they need to reach out and get some help and address something they're having.
And that Derek is my main point. One, I don't know we ever gave the full name of the book. I actually have it right here. It's called This Much I Know, the Space Between. And it's on Amazon and Kindle. And again, my websites have links to it as well. But that's the ultimate point, is that the first step on your journey is the hardest and the bravest, and is to pick up the phone. Pick up the phone, send a text, make a phone call, send an email, whatever you need to do to reach out for help. Because just as in AA recovery or NA recovery, self-sponsorship gets you in trouble. You cannot recover from whatever it is you're working on alone. If you could, you wouldn't be struggling with it.
Yeah.
You would have had it figured out already. So my challenge to people when I speak is dare to believe that you matter, and that you matter enough to have someone else come alongside you, help you, encourage you, help you struggle, help you learn things, or maybe relearn things, because you are worth it and the world needs you.
Well, you certainly matter, Sue, and clearly the world needs you as well. I'm coming from this better and smarter too, so I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the time. Thanks, Derek.
Absolutely, Sue. So again, go to Sue Bowles, and is anyone that's just listening to this, it's BOWLES, SueBowles.com, and then that will take you to all these other platforms that you have. So
very much.
Thank you so much for being here, Sue.
All right, thanks, Derek.